Welcome back to the Forge of Sagas. In this video, I'm going to be showing you all how I created the centerpiece for my Chaos Knights army, the Centaur Abominant. This is definitely one of my more extravagant kit bashes, as it requires components from all of the kits you can see on screen, as well as some 3D printed components. I will leave links to where you can find all the 3D printed components in the description of this video. However, I'm really happy with how this project turned out. I'm really excited to show you guys how it was done. So without further ado, let's get started. I got the idea for this build when I saw this 3D printed Centaur body on CG Trader. You can see it here with its optional armor upgrades. I thought it was really cool, so I decided to print it for myself. To help make the process a little easier and not need quite so many supports, I sliced all the pieces in half and printed them on a raft before coming through and gluing them together. If I did this project again, this might be a better kit to do on a resin printer than an FDM printer, but FDM is what I had, so FDM is what I used. I also decided to 3D print the base, including this wrecked rhino and the actual base itself. I put in some little holes for magnets that I'll use to keep this in my magnetic carrying case later, just for a little bit of added convenience. With the base set, it was time for a lot of dry fitting to figure out how I wanted to pose the back legs on this knight. Took a while, but once I was happy with the position, I glued only the hooves in place. This would provide me a much more stable base for posing the rest of the model as I worked towards my end goal. I left the rest of the legs unglued at this time, just to give myself a little bit more flexibility as I assembled the rest of this kit. With the back legs somewhat situated, it was time to look at the front legs, and I found that there was a nice slanted panel on the rhino that would be a great place to glue down the front left hoof. However, first I was going to have to remove this headlight for the rhino in order to give myself a nice flat connection point between the hoof and the rhino. After I had a good connection point, I dry fitted the front legs exactly the same way as I did the back legs, trying to figure out exactly where that hoof needed to be before gluing it in place. Before gluing this central body in place, I needed to add the torso from the Khorne Lord of Skulls kit to make sure I had a really good idea of what the profile would look like. As I dry fitted the pieces, I found that I needed to remove even more of the existing ball joint than I already had, so I just came in with my jeweler's saw and removed it completely. Now that this base component of the torso fit nicely, I really wanted to salvage this weird spinal cord piece from the Lord of Skulls kit. I just thought it was cool. In order to get the piece to fit well against the Centaur body, I just did a lot of small trims and dry fits in order to make sure that I didn't cut away too much of the spinal column, so that I would get a nice flush fit. Now that I had the torso in place to give me a much better idea of the pose, I came in with some liquid superglue and slid it into all of the joints to lock this pose in place. Once all the other legs were secure, I came in and added the fourth leg a little bit more outstretched, as if he was getting ready to trample some poor, unsuspecting model that happened to be standing in front of him. Here's my finished pose, and I have to say, I really like the flexibility of this 3D printed kit. It really gave me the flexibility I needed to get exactly the right pose for my Centaur Knight. Now, any good Centaur Knight is going to need a tail, and thankfully the Knight Abominant kit gives us a tail in the form of the Bale Mace. So, to get this attached to our Centaur Knight, the first thing we have to do is remove this little nub that normally inserts into the waist of the Knight Abominant kit. Once we've got that shaved nice and flat, we're going to go ahead and glue the tail together. Once we've got that trimmed away, we're going to take this attachment piece that normally would cover the waist, and we're just going to remove these little vents so that we can get a cleaner attachment to the back of the Centaur Knight. Once I had everything dry fitted and I was happy with how it would come together, I added my superglue and stuck the pieces together. One thing to note here is that this tail does stick pretty far off the back of the base when you attach it this way. In-game, this might give you a slight disadvantage because it makes your knight easier to see, but in this case, I'm going to let the rule of cool govern my kit bashing decisions, so I decided to go with a much more natural looking join between the tail and the body of the knight. With the body in a stable spot, it was time to turn to the arms. I assembled the tentacles from the Knight Abominant kit and the right arm from the Khorne Lord of Skulls as per the instructions. In order to give myself a little bit of flexibility and loadout in case I don't want this knight to be an Abominant all the time, I added some neodymium magnets to each piece, and then filled the hole with green stuff in order to make sure that my magnets stayed in place. Once the green stuff had dried, I snapped the two pieces together and went in for a little bit of a dry fit to figure out exactly how I wanted to pose this arm. The other nice thing about using magnets is that I could freely rotate the tentacles to help me figure out exactly where they would look best. But once I was happy, I came in and glued the arm in place. However, the other arm wasn't going to be quite as simple. In order to get a good attachment point, I had to remove the forearm from the Lord of Skulls kit, cutting it just below where the skulls were on the upper arm. Took me a little bit of cutting to make sure that this came away cleanly, but eventually I did break it off. Of course, I wanted a magnet on this side too, but there was nowhere inside the arm to mount it. So, I cut a piece of sprue to the appropriate length and glued that inside before grabbing my magnet. This is my favorite way of getting a magnet in place when there's no other obvious way to attach it. Once the glue was dry, I mixed up some more green stuff and used that to further help secure the magnet in place. I made sure to push it down into the gaps where there was no sprue, just to make sure that the magnet would remain stable once it came in contact with the magnet that I'd put inside the Volkite cannon. However, after cleaning up the green stuff, I still wasn't completely happy with how it looked connecting to the weapon. So, I grabbed this bit from the Mechanicus Dune Rider set and clipped away this little door hatch in order to make it seem like there was more of a mechanical joint between the gun and the arm. With all that set, I did the exact same thing with posing the gun arm just to make sure that the cannon would point off in a direction that I wanted. You can also see that I magnetized the chain axe from the Khorne Lord of Skulls and swapped it out for this particular shot. I think it makes a nice counts as for the Reaper chainsword that you get on a bunch of Chaos and Imperial Knights, and it's definitely thematic for the model. As I was putting on the arms, I caught that there were just a few too many weird gaps between my Centaur's body and the spinal cord that I had added from the Lord of Skulls kit, so I grabbed this hatch from the Rhino kit in order to cover up those gaps. However, I didn't want to unglue everything that I had already put together, so I took my jeweler saw and cut the hatch in half so that I could just glue the two sides around the spinal column. Too easy. As you can see, even with careful dry fitting, sometimes things just don't quite go together 100% the way you'd hoped. But with a little bit of creativity and a little bit of green stuff, you can make things look just fine, even if it's not quite what you initially intended. For the head, I wanted something a little bit more knightly than the Lord of Skulls kit, so I grabbed this head from the Adeptus Titanicus Warmaster Titan that I had laying around from my Morkanaut conversion, and used a ball of milliput to attach the head to the neck joint. Once I was happy with how everything looked, I came in with my knife and trimmed away the excess milliput in order to give myself a little bit more of an angular neck and just generally make things look a lot cleaner. With all of the important pieces in place, we can now start having some fun decorating. And the best way to decorate a knight is with armor plating. Some of the plates you can see are 3D printed, but others came from both the Lord of Skulls and the Adeptus Titanicus Warmaster Titan. Regardless of where I'd gotten the bits from, I took a lot of time at this stage dry fitting all of the components to make sure that they looked like cohesive armor rather than a bunch of different things bolted onto a torso. Took me a little bit of time, but I was really happy with how it turned out at the end. My favorite piece of armor was definitely these hip guards that I got off the Khorne Lord of Skulls kit, as they just really helped to smooth the transition between the Lord of Skulls torso and the 3D printed Centaur body. Plus, if I'm being completely honest, I just think they're an absolutely gorgeous bit. As I was thinking about what else I could add, I suddenly realized that I was building a Psyker Knight covered in Khorne insignia, and Khorne isn't particularly fond of Psykers. So, I decided that I would cover up this really big Khorne icon on the shoulder pad with this shoulder piece from the Adeptus Titanicus Warmaster Titan. It's got that big chaos eye. I thought it would be a good fit. So, I cut these little nubs off the back and then shaved them down with my knife in order to get a nice flush fit. I did a lot of test fitting with this piece in order to try and make it sit nicely. However, no matter how I tried, I was really having a hard time getting this piece to lay flush across this Khorne shoulder pad. However, it didn't take long for me to acknowledge that I was going to have to remove the Khorne insignia completely before this piece would fit. I started by coming in with my clippers and trying to get rid of the bulk of the Khorne insignia, before grabbing my Dremel and files in order to sand the entire shoulder pad smooth. The Khorne insignia on the chest was a little bit easier to cover up, as the Knight kit comes with these tilt shields, so I figured I would just glue that right over the top. Too easy. With most of the obvious Khorne insignia covered up, it was time to get back to decorating. I really liked this banner from the Chaos Knight kit, so I decided that I would put that at the front of the Knight to help add a little bit more detail. It took a lot of trimming and dry fitting in order to make this piece fit exactly how I wanted to between the two hip guards and the torso of the Khorne Lord of Skulls, but at the end of the day, I thought it was a really nice addition to the piece, and just helped add a little bit more of that chaotic feel to the front of the Knight. The last piece I decided to add was this 8-pointed Chaos Halo from the Defiler kit. I felt that this would be really cool if I set it just behind the head of my Chaos Knight, as a heretical mockery of the iron halo worn by the worshippers of the Corpse Emperor. Just felt like a nice little nod to some of the things we see in Imperial models, and it just felt right. The last thing I had to do was to smooth out a few of the imperfections that I'd found in my 3D printed parts after I'd primed the model. So, I grabbed this resin water effect and a silicone tint brush, and just spread it over the model in the places where I needed to fill in a few gaps and generally smooth things out. Make sure that you do this in multiple thin layers so that you don't do any damage to the details of your 3D printed parts or any other pieces that you've added to the model. And here he is, all finished. Of course, I decided that since he was a lord among Chaos Knights, he needed a Knight Lord's paint scheme. Yes, I did do all of that lightning work for a pun, and it was worth it. If you guys enjoyed this kit bash, give us a like and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date on all of our future content. If you have any suggestions for things you'd like to see me do, be it model conversions, terrain builds, or anything else, leave me a comment and I'll see what I can do. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again the next time we ignite the Forge of Sagas.